America is at a crossroads. For the first time in our nation's history, we are becoming a majority-minority society, meaning that over the next 3 decades, no one race or ethnicity will dominate the majority population. In effect, we will all become a collection of minorities. Everyone in this room will be a minority. Some of you already are, but think about it. If every person in the country is learning and embracing being a minority. This is actually already happening. Over 50 U.S. cities, over 370 U.S. counties, and 5 U.S. states host majority-minority populations. And Nashville, Tennessee, our very own Music City, USA, is set to become one of these next majority-minority cities in America. Now, whenever there's a fundamental demographic shift like this on a national level, people tend to get nervous. Terrifying questions start to linger in the air, such as, what does this mean for society? What does this mean for my way of life? Will it be better or will it be worse? Do I still belong? Does she belong? Should she belong? Who will hold the power? Who should hold the power? And will those who are in power respect each and every person as they should? Now, these questions are actually natural. And fear itself is actually natural. Fear, as a matter of fact, is why I go to work every day as a conflict resolutions expert to resolve critical divides both at home and abroad. And fear is why I was targeted ruthlessly by an anti-Muslim campaign. Because when people have fear in their hearts, they become easy to manipulate. And that's actually why I'm here with you this evening. No, not to manipulate you, but rather to talk about how we can overcome this fear for the sake of our humanity. And I think that we can overcome this fear by answering the question of what does it mean to belong in America today? And what does it mean to be an American citizen? Now, this is not a political science class, but it is important for us to collectively come together and answer this question so that we can peacefully transition into a majority-minority society. I've been to places, actually, that haven't come together and answered these questions. I've been to those kinds of conflict zones and those types of war zones. I've seen it with my own eyes. And I want to make sure that we don't let that happen to us, that we make sure that we're better than that. And I think we do so by answering this question through a dialogue process that connects us through soul-to-soul conversations, and not negatively charged campaigns, but rather conversations that connect us together. And I guess that this concept was instilled in me at birth. For my name, Samar, in Arabic, actually means a nice evening conversation from dusk until dawn. So I hope you're comfortable. My mother is from Damascus, Syria, and my father is from a small village right outside of Jerusalem. I am a daughter to Syrian and Palestinian American immigrants. I'm also the daughter of Waverly, Tennessee. How many of you all have been to Waverly? Good, I'm very happy to see that. For those of you who know Waverly, then you'll know when I describe it as a small, country, rural town that's affectionately known as the last Mayberry standing. And as the Muslim girl growing up in Waverly, Tennessee, my parents thought it would be a great idea to enroll me in a Southern Baptist school. And after I finished the Southern Baptist school, which I loved, by the way, I then went to a Catholic school. And then after my parents decided I was thoroughly confused, they decided to enroll me in the Waverly public school system. While I was growing up as well, we alternated between the 12 South Mosque in Nashville, it was the closest one to us, and a local Church of Christ in Waverly, Tennessee, that I actually attended with a family that helped take care of me when my father was going through his cancer treatments. Well, so despite a couple of people trying to convert me to Christianity, in good faith efforts, Waverly wrapped its arms around me and really gave me this sense of true belonging. After I left Waverly, I went on to Vanderbilt undergrad and Vanderbilt Law School, and after finishing law school, I decided I really wanted to be an international practitioner. And so I set sail and I focused my career on national security law, cross-border transactions, human rights law, and I lived in South Africa, all over the Middle East. I frequented Europe, and I also lived in Washington, D.C., and worked in the Obama administration in the White House for a number of years. After all of that, I decided it was time to come home. So I gladly accepted the invitation by Governor Haslam to come back home and to expand and open up Tennessee's economy to the global marketplace and to work on developing economic and community development policies, particularly focusing on connecting urban and rural centers. Well, coming home was a wake-up call for me for many reasons. One wake-up call was that it actually confirmed my hunch that I felt when I was working in the federal government, that rural America was in trouble. Citizens in places like Waverly, Tennessee, were feeling and are still feeling left behind. And they're struggling to find their own sense of belonging in this country. What does it mean to belong in America today? They feel left behind. They feel marginalized. They feel disconnected. They feel forgotten. And they feel overworked. And they don't really feel like they can trust the government to provide solutions because, quite honestly, they think many people in the government are corrupt. I'm not saying they are, but that's their perception. And that they're riddled with self-interests. So this situation and this problem facing rural America is actually very dire. They're still in a great recession. While the urban environments have been expanding, the rural areas actually have been downsizing. According to the census data, they've been downsizing by 4.26% since 2008. So while we boast that we are the IT city, and we should be proud of that, I think we should also remember that just down the road, there are people who are truly struggling. And we should be thinking about, well, what does that mean for our country? And what does that mean for us? You see? So with this downsizing of the economy, what's also that we're finding is that it's not because there's a lack of talent. There's plenty of talent in rural America. It's actually because the infrastructure that our country is providing for the rural communities is collapsing. Those platforms that are needed to support education, transportation, communication, and healthcare are just deteriorating. And with that deterioration is making it very difficult for us to create jobs in those environments. And that's one of the reasons as to why it's downsizing. Because it's really difficult to convince an executive to move or to relocate a company into a rural area that doesn't at least have a functioning hospital. Now, that's the economic situation. There's a little bit more bad news as well, and then I'm going to get to the good news. But just to take you on this journey a little bit further, there's the job situation, and then there's the communication situation. Because as I begin and still see the devastation that's plaguing rural America, what I've also noticed is that we have a communication problem. And we have a communication problem really for three main reasons. The first reason is because we don't know how to speak to each other anymore. The way in which we're talking to each other on the coasts and in major cities is really not working for the rest of America. So there's a disconnect. The second reason is that while we talk about ourselves constantly as a nation of 50 states, we really should view ourselves as 3,142 counties. And it's when we look at ourselves on a county-by-county basis, that's when we begin to get to answer our country's needs and questions collectively in a healthy manner. Because each one of those counties has their own set of concerns, strengths, and histories. Yes, they have commonalities, but making sure that we're touching lives on that communal basis is critically important if we're going to move forward as one nation. So the first part of that is, again, there's a communication breakdown. The second is in how we're viewing ourselves. And the third, which potentially concerns me the most, is that we are replacing our positive values with a dangerous worldview. Because of that fear that I talked about in the beginning of the conversation, and because there's all of this confusion that's going on and we're not really connecting and communicating with each other and the economy is downsizing, what's happening is that our positive values, those of fairness, equality, justice, and happiness, are being replaced with a demonizing worldview that is demonizing groups of people based on race, gender, religion, and ethnicity. They're using groups like Muslims and Jews as scapegoats for economic ailments, fear, and strategic uncertainty. The FBI released statistics recently showing that just last year alone, 78.6% of anti-religious hate crimes were committed against Muslims and Jews. 78.6%, ladies and gentlemen. And that's what happened to me. Actually, I'm actually one of those victims of a hate crime. Or rather, I should say hate crimes. For you see, when I decided to come home after that long journey internationally and in Washington, D.C., when I just made that decision to come home, I wasn't seen as a local coming home. Rather, I was seen as the other. And I was seen by a DC-based hate group as their next target. Some of you might remember this, but when I came home in 2012, it was a nightmare. Within just a couple of weeks, billboards started popping up, newspaper ads, strategic TV interviews and radio interviews, protests, marches, all against me. Resolutions were passed in counties across the state calling me a financial jihadist, saying that I had radicalized in Dubai and that my plan was to impose Sharia law on Tennessee. And that there was no way I could be an American, and there was no way that I could work as a public servant or to serve the American government or the state government because I was a Muslim. And they viewed it to be an oxymoron to be both a Muslim and an American. I was demonized as a terrorist. They said I had successfully infiltrated the Democratic Party and the national and the federal government, and that I had come home to infiltrate the Republican Party and the state government of Tennessee. They even said that I was hatching a plan to shut down the Jack Daniel's distillery in Lynchburg, Tennessee. It just kept going. And I was demonized as this monster. And I remember reading things that they said the camel's nose was under the tent. I was referred to again as the financial jihadist, as this terrorist. Fake websites were popping up. And then it got serious. It was serious, but then it got even more serious when law enforcement showed up to my office to say that they had been receiving and picking up death threats so concerning that they were worried about my safety, and they encouraged me to travel frequently outside of the state. Many people, when I was living in the Middle East, had told me, we're worried about you for living over there, and then I come back home and people are telling me that they're worried about me being here in my own home. They tried to take away my sense of belonging, and I was advised not to speak publicly like this for months. It was a very well-funded campaign, and it was very well organized. And while we can laugh about some of the accusations that they made about me, because they are incorrect, just for the record, and while they sound crazy, many people believed it. And that was the thing that was the most concerning for me. Some people came up to me, many people came up to me and told me around the country and around the world and in Nashville as well, particularly in Nashville, don't listen to those crazy people. And I would say, please don't refer to them as crazy people, because I don't look at them as crazy people. I'm looking at them as people who are confused and are being easily manipulated, going back to that point. And I'm very concerned about that. Now, when it was safe enough for me to speak publicly again, it was actually 9 months later. And it was a rainy day in January, and at the last day of January at the Chamber of Commerce in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, just down the road from where, as most of you probably know, the property of a mosque was torched a few years before. It was a gloomy day, and I stepped off stage after talking about our new international strategy plan for the state, which I was very passionate about. And as I was stepping off the stage, a state representative came up to me. And I didn't recognize her, actually, at first. And she said to me, "Do you know who I am?" And I looked at her, trying to find the name tag. The name tag wasn't showing. And I said, "I'm sorry, I know that I should, but I don't know who you are." And she goes, "Well, you should know who I am, because I'm one of the people that organized the protests against you." And I stood there and I looked at her, and then before I could even say anything back to her, I was like, here is one of my accusers standing right in front of me. I wasn't prepared for this today. What do I do? And she looked at me, she goes, "I wish I would have met you before, because you don't seem like a terrorist. You seem like one of us." And then it was almost as if she was feeling a little bit of confusion and shame, and she looked down at her shoes. She could no longer look me in the eye. And she said to me, but frustratingly, she said, "You don't believe in that book, the Quran. I mean, you don't associate yourself with those Muslims, do you? How could you?" And I looked at her, and, all these feelings kept coming back up to me, of course. And I said, because this is somebody who had accused me of being an enemy of the state. And I thought to myself, you know what? This is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for me to connect with this person. And I took a deep breath, and I said, "Ma'am," because that's what we say in the South, "ma'am," my Waverly manners. I said, I do believe in the Quran, and I do associate myself with those Muslims. I am a Muslim, just like I also associate with myself with Tennesseans, as a proud Tennessean and as a proud Southern woman. But I think the disconnect here is that what I believe the Quran says and what you've been told the Quran says are actually two different things. And that's where the disconnect is here. And that's what we need to connect on over coffee and continue this conversation. Well, I did continue that conversation, and I took it upon myself to have many conversations after that with several members of the in the state legislature and outside of the state legislature who had initially targeted me in such a vicious way. And we actually became friends, and we found that we had a lot of commonality, and that we had a lot of commonality as fellow humans and as fellow Tennesseans and as fellow Americans. So, having gone through that journey, ladies and gentlemen, it made me realize that it didn't take a personality shift. It didn't take a stack of evidence to convince this woman that I was not a terrorist or an enemy of the state. It took a face-to-face conversation. It took a face-to-face encounter. It took a soul-to-soul conversation to clear that up. It didn't take multiple millions of dollars. I didn't have to have every single one of my ducks in a row to turn around that multi-million-dollar campaign of hate that was being targeted against me. And that's what gave me the idea to start the 1 Million Conversations campaign, to overcome fear in our country and to position ourselves to peacefully transition into a majority-minority society where we all feel a sense of belonging, and to do so in a way that connects us around our American values, those American values of freedom of speech, individual freedom, separation of church and state, the freedom to worship, hard work, and love of community and neighbors. Those conversations between neighbors are so important, more so than those conversations that we watch every night on television. And these conversations that we have really need to be rooted in also our principles. Because I've found, as a conflict mediator, that when we design dialogue processes around values and principles, people listen more, they judge less, they think deeper, and they actually feel a sense of responsibility to the other. They experience what the South Africans call Ubuntu. I am me because of you. You are you because of me. And that's what I want these Million Conversations to help us do, to help us be true to our country's motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. And since this is Music City, I'm going to end by quoting the legendary music producer, T-Bone Burnett. Let us build a future where we all want to live. Let us make a past that we all finally don't have to forgive. Thank you.